I didn't notice her at first. Not in the way people talk about lightning strike moments, anyway. It was quieter than that. Most mornings, I stopped at the same corner coffee shop before class. Same chipped mug, same over-roasted smell, same half-burned bagel. It was routine, like brushing my teeth. Something I didn't think about. And then one morning she was there, already seated by the window, the kind of table people claim and never leave. Mid-40s, hair tied back in a way that wasn't fussy, book open but not being read. She was stirring her coffee long after the sugar had dissolved. I remember thinking, she looks like she's waiting for something that isn't coming. When I ordered, the barista, who usually forgot my name, looked up and said, "The usual?" I said yeah, and when I turned, her eyes flicked toward me, almost curious. Just a glance, but I carried it back to my table like it meant something. The next day, she was there again. Same seat. Same book. Same long stare. This time she caught me staring. Or maybe I let myself be caught. She smiled, small, uneven, and said, "They always burn the bagels here, don't they?" It was nothing. Just words about breakfast food. But it was also the first thing anyone had said to me that morning, and it landed heavier than it should have. I laughed too quickly and said, "Guess it's tradition." Her smile lingered a little longer than necessary. Then she dropped her eyes back to the book she still wasn't reading. I started noticing things after that. How she always tucked a napkin under her cup, even when it wasn't dripping. How her hand hovered over the sugar jar like she might add more, then didn't. I wondered what her story was. Widow? Divorced? Just someone who liked burnt bagels? I never asked. Instead, we fell into these almost conversations. She'd nod when I walked in. I'd make some dry remark about the weather, or the coffee, or the clock on the wall that never kept time. We never lingered. But somehow, every silence felt full. I don't think she knew how much space she took up in my head. At night I'd catch myself typing out texts to friends I hadn't talked to in months, then deleting them before hitting send. It wasn't that I had nothing to say. It was that everything I wanted to say to her. And I couldn't. Not really. She was just the woman at the coffee shop. My neighbor technically. I'd later realize her gate was the one that squeaked when I came home at night. But in those first weeks, she was just presence. One Thursday, she surprised me. "You're always here early," she said, folding her napkin into neat little squares while I tried not to watch her hands. I shrugged. "Easier than talking to roommates. Or husbands," she murmured. Then she caught herself, as if she hadn't meant to say it aloud. The silence stretched. She looked out the window. I looked at my cup, at the swirl of milk I'd never stirred in. Finally, she said, almost too quietly to hear, "It's nice having someone to nod to." I wanted to say something back. Something that wasn't clumsy, something that would make her keep looking at me instead of away. But all I managed was a soft, "Yeah." She smiled again, softer this time, and gathered her things. When she stood, she pressed a hand lightly on the table, just for balance, or maybe for something else, and said, "See you tomorrow?" I thought that was it. Just another half connection, half lost. But later that night, when I came home and pushed open the squeaky gate, my phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "Thank you for fixing the latch. Coffee tomorrow?" My treat. And just like that, the silence I'd been living in didn't feel so quiet anymore. The next morning, I lingered outside her gate longer than I should have. The latch I'd fixed was still holding, no squeak this time, no resistance. Just a clean click. It felt strange that something so small could matter, that tightening 2 screws had given her a reason to text me. She was already on the porch, waiting. A chipped mug in her hands, steam curling upward into the cool air. "You really did fix it," she said. "I thought it was a lost cause." I shrugged, trying to play it off. WD-40 and stubbornness. That's all it takes. Her laugh was quiet, but it reached her eyes, and that did something I wasn't ready for. Inside, Her house smelled faintly of jasmine tea and old wood. It wasn't polished or staged. There were shoes left by the door, half-folded laundry on a chair, a photo turned face down on a shelf. She handed me a second mug, warmer than I expected. We sat at her small kitchen table. 2 mugs between us, silence filling the space like a third guest. "You live alone?" I asked finally. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Used to be 2 of us. Now it's just me, and the squeaky gate." She smiled, but it didn't erase the weight in her voice. I wanted to ask what happened, but something in her posture, the way she cradled the mug, fingers tense, told me not to. So instead I said, "Well, at least now the gate won't argue with you anymore." That earned me a softer smile. One that stayed. The tea cooled while we circled around safer topics. Bad weather, noisy neighbors, the barista who always burned bagels. But every so often, I caught myself imagining things I shouldn't. Sitting here again next week. Carrying groceries up her steps. Her hand brushing mine, not by accident. And then I'd catch myself and feel stupid. She was twice my age. Mid-40s. Probably someone's mother, someone's ex-wife. I was just the kid who rented the upstairs unit and fixed her gate. Nothing more. Still, when she glanced at me between sips, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was measuring the silence too. At one point, she set her mug down and said, almost casually, "You remind me of someone. My son's friend. He used to stop by after school, raid the fridge, talk about nothing." Her eyes went distant, like the memory was playing on a screen only she could see. "Funny how you remember the small things," she added. I nodded, though I felt something shift in me. A reminder of the line between us. Her words should have cooled the air, but instead they made it heavier, more fragile. I told her, before I could stop myself, "I don't really talk to people much. Not like this. Not since—" I trailed off, realizing I'd said too much. "Since what?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Doesn't matter." But the truth was sitting there anyway. Since my dad left, since my friends moved away, since conversations started feeling like favors instead of connections. She didn't push. Just nodded like she understood more than I'd said. The clock ticked too loudly in the next room. The tea was cold now. She stood to take my cup, and when I reached to hand it over, my fingers brushed hers. Just an accident, barely a touch. But she didn't pull back right away. She looked at me for a second longer than she should have. Then she smiled, soft, unfinished, and said, "Thanks for fixing the gate." I went back upstairs with my chest tight and my hands empty, but that moment stayed. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I didn't mean to linger so long that evening, but the hallway light caught her in a way that made me pause. She was folding laundry on the sofa, one sock in her hand, jaw tight like she was thinking about something else entirely. I cleared my throat. "Need a hand?" She glanced up, startled, then shook her head. "No, it's fine." Her voice was calm, but the hesitation in her eyes didn't lie. She wasn't shutting me out completely, just keeping me at the edge. I moved closer anyway, careful not to step on anything, careful not to seem eager. She folded the sock with quiet precision, and I watched her fingers. Small, deliberate movements, like she was setting boundaries without words. I wanted to ask something, anything, but my voice stalled. Instead, I sat down nearby, a little too close, a little too far, and tried to act like I belonged there. The room was quiet except for the hum of the heater. I could hear the faint scrape of fabric against fabric. She caught me watching her. "You don't have to stare," she said softly. "I'm not." I stopped. Not lying, not sure what I was doing. She didn't push, didn't scold, just sighed and picked up another piece of laundry. I realized the sound of her breathing was louder than the heater now. My heart was hammering in a slow rhythm that didn't match the quiet room. Then the interruption came. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, frowned, and muttered something about a friend needing help. I didn't catch the words, and I didn't want to. She stood, and I followed with my eyes, noticing the way she kept her back straight, shoulders stiff. She wasn't walking away from me, not exactly, but she was putting distance where there was almost none. I wanted to reach out, to stop her, but I didn't. The moment stretched, waited with everything we weren't saying. Later, after she returned, we tried to settle back into the room. Silence again. Too loud now. I stirred my tea too much, watched the swirl. She adjusted the blanket around her knees, her hand brushing against mine by accident. She pulled back immediately, not with irritation, just awareness. I swallowed hard. The space between us felt like it could collapse if we leaned too close. I wanted to say it. Whatever it was, some version of, "I like this," or, "I can't stop thinking about you." But my words wouldn't come. Instead, I leaned just a fraction closer, careful, hesitant, letting the air fill the space I couldn't name. She looked at me, eyes flicking down, then back up. For a heartbeat, maybe two, I thought it could happen. Our faces, a breath apart, the quiet weight of all the small gestures, the hand brushing, the look, the laugh we shared over nothing. Then her phone buzzed again. She grabbed it, turned slightly, and that invisible line held. I didn't move. I just sat there, feeling the nearness in my chest. The silence returned, heavier now. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I didn't know if she'd felt it too, or if I'd imagined it all. But something had shifted. Something small, unspoken. I didn't reach for her again that night. And maybe that was the point. The evening was soft, the kind where the air smells faintly of rain even if the sky is clear. I found her sitting on the bench outside the corner store, one hand resting on her mug, the other wrapped around the strap of her bag like it anchored her. I sat down beside her, careful not to startle her. She didn't look up right away. "You're late," she said finally. Not a complaint, just a statement. "Traffic," I muttered. Not a lie, not really. We sipped our drinks in silence. The steam rose between us, little clouds that felt too loud in the quiet street. I watched her fingers trace the rim of the cup. There was a subtle tremor in her hand. "Did you?" I hesitated. "Did you see him today?" She looked at me then. A pause. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but something else. Hurt? Fear? I couldn't name it. "I ran into an old friend," she said slowly, voice soft. "It was nothing. Just conversation." I should have nodded and let it go. Pretended it didn't sting. But the air in my chest had thickened. Jealousy, sharp and quiet, bubbled up where I hadn't realized it would. "I hate that you can have these moments without me noticing," I said before I could stop myself. Her gaze dropped. The steam from her cup blurred the line of her jaw. "I don't," she started, stopped. "Don't what?" I pressed, more quietly now, almost afraid of the answer. She shook her head. "I don't want to explain everything all the time. Not to you. Not yet." I felt the words like a weight on my chest. And then I did something I rarely do. I let myself be honest. "I care too much," I whispered. "And I know I shouldn't. I know I'm too young. I know, but I can't stop thinking about this. About you. About—" My voice trailed off. I didn't finish. Couldn't. Her hand twitched on the bag. She glanced at me, really looked, and the pause between us stretched like it could snap. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice barely audible. "Scared of what this, whatever this is, could do. To you. To me. To everything." The words were calm, but they hit harder than any argument could. I wanted to reach for her, wanted to close the distance, wanted to hear the confession she wasn't saying. My fingers itched to brush hers, to lean in, to... And yet I didn't. We just sat there, shoulders nearly touching, watching the streetlights flicker on. The tension was heavy, tangible, like the world had narrowed to this bench, this quiet confession, this small, unbearable moment. "I don't know if I should ask," I murmured. "But do you ever feel it too?" Her gaze dropped to her hands, and I realized that asking the question aloud didn't make the answer any easier. Silence answered me instead. And somehow, that silence was louder than any word could be. The next week, things shifted. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. She didn't wait on the porch anymore. The gate I'd fixed squeaked under my hand, and I realized she hadn't been out to check it in days. I texted her once, just a simple, "Coffee tomorrow?" No reply. The next day, I passed her at the corner store. She smiled briefly, but it didn't reach her eyes. She looked like someone holding a secret too heavy to drop. I tried to brush it off. Maybe busy, I told myself. But then came the small things: the half-filled mug left on the counter, the note about her son's recital she didn't mention in conversation, a laugh that seemed forced when she ran into a neighbor. And me, waiting. Waiting for a glance, a word, a nod. Waiting for the warmth that used to wrap around ordinary moments. I imagined reasons, each one worse than the last. Did she think I was too young? Did she see me differently now? Was it her ex calling, her child needing her attention, or some invisible boundary I'd unknowingly crossed? I paced my apartment, phone in hand, drafting texts I'd never send. I don't know what I did wrong. I missed the bench. Do you feel it too? Each unsent message piled onto the last, like bricks in a wall I couldn't climb. And yet, in the evenings, I found myself walking past her gate, hoping, just for a moment, that she might appear. That she might wave. That something ordinary could bridge the sudden distance. One Saturday, I stopped at the corner coffee shop. I ordered the usual. Sat at the same table. She never arrived. The barista asked if I wanted a refill, and I nodded, but my eyes kept drifting to the door. When I finally left, the gate was closed. The latch smooth under my hand, fixed but cold. The bench outside her porch empty. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I left the street, left the gate, left my footsteps hanging behind me. The message I never sent still hovered in my drafts: "I'm here, if you want to talk." And maybe she never would. I found her on a Tuesday evening, standing by the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a mug like it could keep her steady. The light from the street outside pulled across the floor, painting her in shades of orange and gray. I hesitated in the doorway, realizing how small the space had become between us, how each breath felt like it carried the weight of weeks. She looked up, eyes flicking toward me, then down at her cup. The silence stretched, tight and patient, like it had been waiting for this moment. "I came by," I said finally. My voice sounded flat to me, but it carried something heavier underneath. Something that had been building in every pause, every unsent text, every bench and coffee shop. Her lips pressed into a line. "I wasn't sure you would." I stepped closer. Not too close. Not enough to cross the line we'd both been circling. "I couldn't, not." She glanced at me, and then the words came. Quiet, raw, the kind of honesty that trembles in a room with no one else to hear it. "I didn't know if I should, if I could." Her hands tightened around the mug. "But I've thought about you. Every day. More than I wanted to admit. I wanted to speak, wanted to say all the things I'd been holding back. But instead I let the quiet stretch, let the room hold our hesitation like it could cradle it safely. I started, then stopped. What I was going to say could ruin everything we'd just begun to find. Could undo the fragile balance. She set the mug down, and I noticed how small the movement was, deliberate but careful. Her fingers lingered on the edge, brushing mine ever so slightly. Not a touch, not really. Just a reminder that we were here, together, despite everything. "I don't know if this is right," she admitted. "Not for me, not for us. For the world outside the walls of this kitchen, for the life we'd both been trying to protect." I nodded. "I don't know either. But I want to try, just for now." Her eyes softened, just a little, and she gave the faintest of smiles. "Okay." And that was it. A word. A look. A fragile agreement. No grand gestures. No confession shouted into the wind. Just two people, holding space for something new, something dangerous, something quietly theirs. I leaned against the counter, letting the warmth of her kitchen seep into my chest. She returned to her mug, and we sat there in silence, but it didn't feel empty anymore. I realized then that vulnerability wasn't a moment. It was a decision. And we had made it together, without words that could ever truly capture what that meant. A soft sigh. A shared glance. A human connection. That was enough. Weeks passed. Or maybe months. I stopped keeping track. Time felt different now, less urgent, less jagged edges, more the soft rhythm of ordinary life. She still had the bench outside her porch. I still fixed the squeaky gate when it protested in the evenings. But the moments in between, the shared glances over coffee, the quiet chatter while folding laundry, the way her mug always warmed her hands just so, those had grown into something steady. One morning, 8:47 a.m., I arrived at the corner coffee shop. She was already there, black coffee steaming in front of her. She didn't need to order, the barista knew her routine. I sat across from her. No words about the past weeks, no apologies or confessions. Just coffee, and presence, and the way the silence felt like home. Later, at her house, we sat on the sofa. I helped with a task, folding laundry, stacking dishes, and she watched me quietly, fingers resting on her mug. That small gesture, repeated hundreds of times now, felt like a promise. Sometimes we laughed softly over burnt bagels. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. The gaps between words weren't empty, they were filled with the awareness of each other, with the trust we'd built quietly, without grand declarations. She told me about her son's friend who had reminded her of me. I didn't respond with a joke or explanation. I just nodded, and we let the moment settle. A nod, a smile, the brush of her hand against mine while reaching for sugar, these were the small markers of what we'd found together. One evening, I leaned against the doorframe, watching her stir tea. "You always stir it too much," I said. She looked up, caught my gaze, and smiled. "Maybe I like the rhythm," she said softly. I realized then that the love we'd built wasn't explosive or cinematic. It was quiet, steady, earned in countless small acts of care. A late-night knock at the door, a nearly cold mug of coffee, a gate fixed for no reason but to see her smile. Life wasn't perfect. Some days the world outside intruded harshly, and she pulled back for reasons I didn't always understand. But now, even when that happened, I didn't feel the panic I once did. I felt grounded. Anchored. The bench outside her porch still creaked. The clock still ticked a little too loudly. The steam from her mug still curled in the air. But those things were no longer interruptions. They were companions, reminders of the small, real life we built together. I sipped my coffee and watched her quietly. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel anxious about tomorrow. Just warmth. And the knowledge that we'd earned this, moment by moment, pause by pause, gesture by gesture. She glanced at me, eyes flicking down, then up again. I knew what she was thinking without a word. I smiled faintly. She smiled back, soft, unfinished, full of history we shared alone. And I thought, this is enough. Ch2.